Thank you for coming to the Iowa City Public Library. My name is Maeve Clark, and I'm the Adult Services Coordinator here. So I get to help with the programming for Weber Days. And what is Weber Days? Does everyone in here know who Irving Weber is? Okay. There are the 8 books that the Lions Club published of Irving Weber's columns. That was about 300 of them, and all of them, the library also had, Lolly Eggers, who was the library director 2 times ago, wrote a biography of Irving Weber, and she had all of the columns from the Press Citizen. So after the Lions Club and the University of Iowa scanned those, we scanned all of the newspaper articles, and Melody Dvorak in the back is the person who scanned all of those articles. And they're all available to you through the University of Iowa's website and through our website as well, and it's a fascinating look at Iowa City history. So Irving Weber, Weber Days, and that's why we're here. So we try to teach people, gather information, do all sorts of things about local history during May. So tonight, I will turn it soon over to our speaker, but I wanted to tell you that we have a couple other things that we're doing for both adults and for children. There are 2 ancestry classes, 2 genealogy classes coming up. You can sign up for those. Melody back there, and I will be at the Big Grove Brewery and Tap Room next week at 5:30 to talk about the birth of a Ped Mall, and it's part of the History at the Grove presentations, and we have lots and lots of pictures and stories of the Ped Mall, and we're hoping people will come. We have some mystery pictures that we don't know what it is, but I bet you somebody out there knows what they are, because every time there's a posting on Facebook about X, Y, and Z, people have lots of opinions. Sometimes they get into arguments. We hope there will be no fisticuffs, but I think that'll be a good presentation. And military records. And then our final adult program is not next Wednesday, it's at the Big Grove. Then we're taking a Wednesday off. And then the final one is a book written by Frank Yoder with the Johnson County Historical Society called A History of Country Schools in Johnson County. And they'll be here talking about the book, and they'll also be selling the book. So we hope that you'll come back for more. But I'm going to turn the program over to our guest tonight, Doug Alberhasky. Who all knows Doug in this audience that can admit it? Okay. So Doug has very graciously offered to do his program for us, and he's brought beer bottles, but no beer.
No, I was told no beer samples tonight, right. So sorry.
But he can tell you where you can get them.
Yes, we might have a little opportunity for that later. So, but my name is Doug Alberhasky. I am the owner of John's Grocery, 3rd generation owner. My grandparents started back in 1948. I'm a lifelong Iowa Cityan. I'm 7th generation in town, so we've basically been here just about as long as Iowa City has. A little bit more about myself. Besides managing John's, I have a snow removal company, a property management company. I am in the Optimist Club, and we do the Christmas trees down at the Dairy Queen on Riverside Drive every November and December. I'm heavily involved in Scouts. I'm a Scoutmaster for Troop 212, and currently I'm the president of the Hawk Area Council of Boy Scouts of America. And I'm thinking about starting the group of men who can't say the word no. So if there's anybody else in the crowd that would like to join me with that, yeah. So, but I've put this together. I've been very fortunate over the years to have gotten to know Marlon Ingalls, our state archaeologist, and he, along with other people, have shared a lot of photos. And I've always been a history buff, and history is amazing when it comes alive, especially when it comes alive in your neighborhood. And this is why I kind of put this together. So this is the history of beer in Iowa City. So a little bit of history. Iowa City was founded in 1839. Iowa City and Washington, D.C. were 2 of the only towns that were actually completely platted before they were settled. Originally, oops, what did I do? There you go. Originally, Old Capitol here, down Iowa Avenue. The governor's mansion was supposed to be right at the end of that, just like in Washington, D.C. So 1839 for the founding of Iowa City. State of Iowa was founded in 1846. University of Iowa, founded in 1847, and then near and dear to my heart, a grocery store, dry goods store, was founded in 1848. This is one of the first permanent buildings in Iowa City, 128 North Gilbert Street, the original doorway right here. So this is basically taking up our wine room and our deli kitchen right now. Now, when you look back in the basement, these are some of the original timbers. They basically just planed off two sides of a tree and tossed it on down. And you don't see building construction like this anymore. At one point, I was doing a little bit of remodeling in our deli kitchen, and there was one of these original beams that was left, and I was going to try to use it to tie in to some of the new construction, and it wasn't in quite into the foundation quite good enough. So I just took it and pitched that piece of wood, and unbeknownst to me, my dad actually saved it. Had it quartered, stained up real nice, and gave it to all of our relatives for a Christmas present. And when we were actually counting the rings on the tree, these trees started its life during the presidency of Thomas Jefferson. So when you think about some history, that's what we got. Now, when it comes to beer and the settling of Iowa City, we really had two major groups. You had the Czechs and the Germans and the Irish and the English settling in Iowa City. Now, coincidentally, when you look at beer, ales come from the north in the United Kingdom, Ireland, Belgium, and then lagers come from Southern Europe. Germany, Czech Republic, Italy, Austria. Now, ales are top fermenting yeast and warm fermentation. Lagers are bottom fermenting yeast and cold fermentation. There are other types of beers that are called hybrids, not really good on gas mileage, but they're basically a mixture of the two. Bavarian wheat beers are a really good hybrid, being that it is a lager, but it is brewed at warmer fermentation. Now, in Germany, they had something called the Reinheitsgebot and the Purity Law of 1516, and that basically said that only 4 ingredients could be used in beer. Barley malt, that's your backbone of the beer. Hops are what gives it its bitterness and also is the agent that allows it to be preserved. Water is the most important part of beer, and then the yeast is what kind of brings it all together. Now, in early Iowa City, brewing wasn't just a job, it was an entire industry. And this picture here is from the J.P. Dostal Great American Brewing Company. But you have a cooper, basically the guy that made the barrels. You had the ice handler, because keeping the beer cold was very important. You had a pipe fitter, you had the brewer, and you had the barkeep. But it was many more people than that. These are all of the jobs that were associated with brewing back in the day. And when you look at all of those different vocations, you could see that really the early brewing industry was a very major part of life in early Iowa City. Now, we had at one point 3 major production breweries right in the north side. So here on the corner of Market and Gilbert is John's Grocery. The J.P. Dostal Great Midwestern Iowa Brewing Company is basically from Bluebird Cafe to George's. The Englert City Brewing Company was located basically kind of between El Bandidos and High Grounds Cafe. And then the Hudson Geiger Graff Brewing Company is current day Brewery Square. I love this little bit of information. 1857, 3 breweries, 40 bars for 7,000 people. You call that stumbling distance because you know, they were very thirsty back then. And I love this photo. This is a bird's eye view of Iowa City. I think Big Grove uses this on their menus and stuff, but it kind of shows what Iowa City would have looked like back in the late 1800s. Now, our family's Czech, and Czech, the Czech language is very beer-centered, obviously. Pivovar is the word for beer, and it's literally translated into beer cooker. And when you look at the brewing process, you have the raw ingredients, malt, which, like I said, is the backbone of the beer, goes into the mill, and then it goes down into the boiler. You add water in the boiler and your hops. Goes up first into the filter, the mash tun, and then it goes up into the whirlpool. Then it will go down into the cooler, where it goes in the fermentation tank. You add the yeast. It'll then, in lager beer, be cellared for 28 days, and then it'll get either kegged or bottled, and then it's served. And so that's basically the brewing process in a nutshell. Many breweries are what we call vertical breweries, and basically you start up at the very top with your raw ingredients, goes into the mill, and then it just, gravity takes its course, goes down in the mash tun, then down in the brew kettle, and then down in the cooling vessel, and then finally into the lagering rooms. And you'll see this when we get in a couple of the breweries, that this is very evident by the verticality of the brewing. These are a couple of breweries over in the Czech Republic that we visited back in the day. This is all malt in their malting room. This was the coolest little Zamboni I think I've ever seen. They basically would just kind of drive over the malt to get it so it's ready to get going, basically. Then it goes into the brew kettle, and then these are warm fermentation rooms where the yeast gets going, and then they put it into cold fermentation a little bit later. This is a brewery museum that we visited at the town of Pilsen, Pilsner Urquell. My brother and I took this tour. It was supposed to be an hour-long tour. After 5.5 hours, our guide said, if I don't get home, my wife is going to kill me. So we kind of had to cut it short, but this was the most comprehensive brewing museum I've ever seen. And this was one of their dioramas, again showing the verticality of the brewing process. Now, our first brewery that we're going to get to is the Geiger Union Brewing Company, founded in 1869. This is the current brewery square. Simeon Hotz, Anton Geiger started it. Hotz Avenue on the kind of just down from Market and Jefferson Street was named after this gentleman right here. They were both of German descent. This is one of the original ads in the German language newspaper back in the day, but they started the brewery. This is a fire map from 1888. This is what the Iowa City Fire Department would have used to determine what was in each building and how they would fight the fire. The brewery itself was this area right up here, right on the corner of Lynn Street and Market Street. But then you notice that there's a lot of other outbuildings and stuff. You have the tin shop, you have the ice house, you have the horse stables and stuff. But it's really interesting to see that there was fuel was coal, lights were gas, candles in the brewery. They used city water. Fire was a very real hazard to the old breweries, and so it was very important for the Iowa City Fire Department back in the day to be able to know how they would actually fight the fires. This is a original artist rendition of the brewery. The ice house back in the corner was never quite that big, and also you don't see St. Mary's, which would have been right over here as well. But this is what they thought it was originally going to look like. I love it. Make mine Graff's Golden Glow, bottled expressly for family use. This was one of their original advertisements, and it was very important to make sure that the beer was seen as being very family friendly. Many times the men would spend a little bit too much on their beer, and so especially for family use was a very important aspect of that. This is another one of the German ad in the original German language newspapers. But at this point, it was Conrad Graff. Graff was originally the brewmaster of the Hotz Geiger Union Brewing Company, and he eventually married Simeon Hotz's daughter and bought into the brewery. And you'll see where a little bit later on we'll talk about the beer riots and how that could have been a very large mistake on his part as far as timing. This is the entrance into the beer caves underneath of Brewery Square. In order to gain access into here, myself and Marlon Ingalls, the state archaeologist, have taken probably about 200 people down into the beer caves over the years. We try to do that just for fundraisers and special events. This is the Iowa City Fire Department's probably second worst nightmare scenario for doing a confined rescue. I think the worst would probably be the steam tunnels underneath of the river, but trying to get somebody out of here would be a very dangerous thing. But this is how you get in. That doorway is only about 4.5, 5 foot tall. You go in, and at this point, we're probably about 8 to 9 feet underground. You walk in, there's a double set of doorway, then you have to go up a ladder, you go back, you go around what we've called Fat Man's Corner, which is very narrow, and then you're in the next area where you get down into the beer cave via, we actually took out the ladder of death and installed a new ladder, but that's about 24 feet straight down. And in this area, I can't stand up straight, it's so short. Originally, there was a freight elevator that went down here, and that's the only way that you could access it. And so, as I said, you know, fire department getting somebody out of there would be kind of a scary situation. But that's former Mayor Matt Hayek going down, and he was very happy to be there. Yes, sir?
Yeah, so they were cellaring beer down there?
Yes.
How did they get the beer out of there? Because those kegs are pretty heavy.
They had actually a steam powered elevator that would take the kegs up and down. Yeah.
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, so the question was how did they get the beer out of the caves? You know, what goes down must come up at some point, and that was the only way that you can get in and out. There's been talk of trying to develop the caves into probably the coolest bar in Iowa, but at this point, the location, the depth, and having a second egress would be virtually impossible. So. Yes. Yes, the caves are intact. Yeah, we'll see that here next. So in order to build these caves, it was basically a cut and cover operation where first they would have dug down, and in the case of Brewery Square, we're looking about, the floor is about 32 feet underground. They would build up these huge buttresses of brick, and then after that, they would build this framework. And off the framework, they'd do all the cribbing, and then you'd actually start laying all of the block on top. Once they got one section done, they'd move it back and they'd do another section. We figure in most places, the bricks in the roof of Brewery Square are at least 4 courses thick. So this is the West Beer Cave. As you go down the shaft, this is what you come into first. Interesting points about this, you have the little nooks. These would have been for candles to be set in, and you can kind of see it just barely, but there is another arch in this area. So if they at one point wanted to go back farther to the west, they would have had an easy place to be able to gain access to that. You also can see in this, and it's a little hard to see from this photo, but there's a clear delineation where they actually moved that cribbage to the next area, and it wasn't quite a smooth transition in building. You know, they didn't really use a lot of levels back then. They just go, that's good enough. In this photo, you'll notice all of the rings. These were actually the old lagering vessels. At one point, there was a fire in the basement, which pretty much destroyed all the equipment down there. The only thing really left are these rings, and then this is an ammonia chiller left over from when they did soda pop in the brewery. This is an ad for one of the lagering vessels, and in this, they were made of cypress. I actually visited the August Shell Brewing Company in Newell, Minnesota, and in their area that they don't really take a lot of people anymore because of safety reasons, they had lagering vessels that were about 40 foot tall. And a number of shipbuilders had gone to Ted Martini, the owner of the Shell Brewing Company, asking to buy that because if you're restoring a boat, I guess old cypress is the best wood to go after. But he didn't want to sell the heritage, so he kept all those. But so this is basically all those rings that you see on the floor. This is what those would have been originally. Now this is the South Beer Cave. This is basically heading directly towards St. Mary's. This cave from floor to ceiling is about, I think, 14 feet tall. This is a LiDAR scan of the caves and stuff. So this is the elevator shaft that you take the ladder down into. This is that first area with all of the hoops and the ammonia chiller. And then it goes off. There is a wall, and then there's another section. And then this right here is an air shaft. They built the wall, we think, when they did the addition that is now where Devotee and the Chinese restaurant is. The building originally, after it was a brewery, became economy advertising, and when they did that section of the building, they built the secondary wall here. In this back area, there is a slit in the ground that they would have actually floated the kegs to transport them from the back to the front. And so they've done a little bit of groundwork to kind of flatten this area here off. I think we did that when they were doing the soda pop and stuff in the brewery. This air shaft, though, is something that is pretty interesting. If you're going out the emergency exit, you see this kind of little bricked area, and this is the air shaft going down. Last year, some of my Boy Scouts and Marlon and a couple of other volunteers got probably about 8 truckloads of dirt and rubble and stuff out of the cave, and basically we kind of set up a block and tackle, and it showed all my scouts how to use a block and tackle, which was a lot of fun, but that was a lot of hard, dirty work. But they really did enjoy it. But that's the air shaft. Now, after they did the stopped doing the brewing, and one of the bottles I have up here is some of the original Bottling Works bottles. They started doing the bottling of soda right after Prohibition. And they did it originally in the brewery, but then they eventually moved the Soda Works facility up to right to the north of Hamburg Inn. And the reason why they had to move it was because there was so much wild yeast in the air from the brewing that they actually were having the soda pop spontaneously ferment. So not really a good thing. So they had to eventually move. This is one of the ads that I found from the Graff Bottling Works. This was for, I would say, Centennial in 1839, and this basically says a little bit more about why they had to move. But you know, they did orange, grape, lemon, lime, cream, strawberry, root beer, and cherry. So, and then they had done other beers as well. So, but that's pretty much Graff. Now we're going to move to our second one, the Englert City Brewing Company, founded in 1853. This is Market Street along the top here. This is going to be Gilbert Street right here. So again, this is kind of in between the lawyers' parking lot. This would be El Bandido's, and then this would be the new Clark building with High Grounds Cafe in it. No watchmen, 4 sleeping in the brewery, 1,000 barrels per year. Pretty good size. This was his original house. Now at one point, and I'll get into that, but they did a lot of house moving. This is Louis Englert, the owner of the Englert City Brewing Company, and he also had the Englert Ice Company. It's very interesting and completely foreign thought these days, but he actually shut down the brewery for 3 years during the Civil War, and he actually led the Graybeards Regiment of the Iowa Cavalry in the Civil War, and survived the Civil War and came back. But imagine having your business going at its full and then just stopping to go off and fight for your country. You know, it's pretty amazing. He bought the land at 319 East Market Street for $75. Pretty good investment, right? The original building was only 24 by 36, and at 10 barrels a day, it was truly a microbrewery. This is his house, and it's now located at 320 Jefferson Street. Originally, it was at 321 Market Street. And like I said, they did a lot of house moving back in the day. Our office building at 120 North Gilbert Street was actually moved. I found a photo taken from the steeple of St. Mary's, and it showed the store and it showed 114 North Gilbert Street, but this house wasn't there. And in looking at the foundation, I can say, yeah, they definitely moved this. Another one that was moved was the Bostic Guest House, 115 North Gilbert Street. This building originally was the first Iowa City City Hall. And it actually sat on the corner of on Gilbert and Jefferson Street, and they moved it back a half a block. And if you look at it, this side of the building actually used to be the side of the building, and the south side was originally the front. And you can see a really nice, much larger entryway, but at some point, when they moved it, they redid the porch and all that. But it's a very nice old building, lots of history to it. But in Iowa City, the largest building that they ever moved was Calvin Hall. This is a picture from 1905. They had built this building on the Pentecost, and in 1899, the president of the university kind of came up with the idea of having the 4 buildings on the Pentecost. The problem is they just got done building this building, so what were they to do? They hired a whole bunch of laborers, and it had, I want to say it was like 30 mules and like 20 horses, and they actually moved this a couple inches at a time across Jefferson Street, and they actually turned the entire building. So you think about engineering today, and you think about engineering when this was going on, and it really truly was an amazing feat. So lots of building moving back in the day. The third brewery is the J.P. Dostal Great Western. This was a fire map again from 1888. This shows the main brewery itself. This was a bar in the middle, and then there was a little area that had a courtyard to it. This is kind of where George's is right now, and then this is where the Pearson's was, and then so this would have been Hamburg Inn up top here. This was established in 1857. This is looking from High Grounds Cafe, so this would be George's right here. And then this is the bar, and then this is that little courtyard area. This is a picture from the corner of Mark and Gilbert from where John's is, showing the brewery. One thing I always try to like to do whenever I can is to actually show the old picture with a new picture, just so it gives you a little bit better sense of place. So this is the original Pearson's drug building here, and this is the building that used to have Sutton's TV and is now Goosetown Cafe. 1909 on that picture. This is a picture also taken from the roof of St. Mary's, showing the brewery, and it was quite large. And then this was originally, of course, the Pearson's building, and then you can see kind of Poly Eyes up here. If anybody has a better picture than this was, I took this picture, and it was behind glass, and I'm always looking for better pictures, and so I'd love to be able to find a better resolution of this one, because it gives a real unique perspective on the brewery and the size. This was his house, corner of Bloomington and Van Buren Street. He actually donated his house to the Sisters of Mercy, and it was part of the hospital for a long time, and they tore it down when they did the new nurses building and stuff, and then this is the emergency room area right here of Mercy. This is an interior shot of the brewery. I'm not actually sure what the date on this is, but interesting features about this. This would have been a full barrel of beer. This would have been 32 gallons. These would have been 8-gallon quarter barrels. You know, all the guys are sitting around having a beer after a long day. Not really a lot of OSHA going on back then, you know, little kind of scary. But the unique thing is, right here, this is an old leather belt. And generally speaking, they would have one steam engine in the brewery that would power the entire brewery. And they would hook up the belts as needed to the different pieces of equipment just to kind of keep everything going. This is a picture of the Cantillon Brewery in Belgium that my wife and brother and I visited. And this shows how all these belts were basically connected up to the various pieces of equipment, and they'd only put them on when they needed to run that individual piece of equipment. And I never kind of put two and two together, but the reason why the buffalo were actually hunted to the verge of extinction was because all of the belts needed for the Industrial Revolution were made of buffalo hide. So if you ever get a chance to go to Belgium, this is probably one of the coolest breweries I've ever been to. It's right by the Brussels Middies train station. Stepping into the brewery is like stepping back 120 years. And Jean-Pierre Van Roy, the owner, probably opened up about 20 bottles of beer for us. So it's a dirty job being the beer guy, but somebody's got to do it. Yes, sir?
When are you going to start importing Cantillon?
The question is, when were we going to start importing Cantillon? That's not up to us, it's the brewery. When we went over, they hadn't done much export to the United States. We went over in '99, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but when we really got into doing the high proof beer, Cantillon was one of our amazing go-to beers. At one point, we got in their Louis Pepe line of lambic. These were so rare that each bottle was hand numbered. There were 5 different types, and you know, we had bottles number 21 through 36 of 60 bottles. And when I added up all the bottles and all the bottles that we actually had, we had 1/5 of the world's supply of Cantillon sitting in John's. And at that point, a customer called up our importer and said, "Hey, I'm looking for this Cantillon beer, where can I go?" And he said, "Well, you go to John's Grocery." So this customer flew in his own plane from Anchorage, Alaska, landed at the Iowa City airport, took a cab up to John's, bought $1,200 worth of lambic, and flew home. So there's some very passionate people that really like Cantillon beer. So yes, I know, I am too. We got in some about 5 years ago, and I made the mistake. Our distributor delivered it in his own truck from El Cater, and he had a whole bunch of other beer, and all the Cantillon was on top. And I took a picture and I posted it on Facebook, and it looked like we got an entire truckload of Cantillon, and our distributor got into so much trouble it wasn't even funny. So we got to be careful about what we do on social media these days. But this is one of the original bottles, and this is the bottle right here. Raised letters, J.P. Dostal Brewing, Iowa City. Actually found that, I was telling Maeve earlier, we had a water main leak at John's, and I had about 3 inches of mud in the entire basement of the store. And this is before I actually put everything up on 2x4s. So my brother and I got the privilege of moving about 5,000 cases in one day, which was not fun. But I wanted to see how thick our foundation wall was, so I stuck my hand through the wall, and on the other side, there was that bottle. So, I mean, that was, you know, complete dumb luck. But you know, all the glass would have been originally made here in Iowa City. Their motto was Erlanger, the beer that made Milwaukee jealous. And this is an original bottle. You can come up later and feel it. It's quite a bit heavier than a modern bottle. But Erlanger beer was made by the Dubuque Star Brewing Company for a number of years. And I'll get into why that's so funny in a little bit, but this is a close-up picture. So it shows the Iowa Brewing Company, Iowa City, Iowa there on that one. Now, when we look at the topography of Iowa City, it is nothing like it was back in the day. This is George's right here, so you got Bluebird Cafe over here. This is the city lot where we hold the Northside Oktoberfest, and this is called Beer Creek. This is actually Iowa City's first sewer. In order to make 1 gallon of beer, it takes 5 gallons of water to make that 1 gallon. So we're looking at a tremendous outflow of wastewater. Originally, there was just a normal little creek running through here that could not take that amount of water. So the breweries actually went through and they set up this sewer system, and it's made up of humongous 5-foot by 5-foot by 1-foot thick chunks of limestone, basically for bottom, sides, and top. And this goes from basically underneath the Mercy Hospital all the way down to the river. Marlon Ingalls, our state archaeologist, one time decided to put a little rover underneath there to kind of see where it went, and he said that underneath the breweries, underneath the Mercy Hospital was the biggest mice he'd ever seen. So you don't want to go kind of rummaging around down there. And also, if you ever are parking in the north side and there's a really good threat of rain, you don't want to park anywhere near this because this doesn't really flow very well, and I've seen some very small cars that got flooded up to like midway up their door, so you want to be careful where you park here. So, but that is called Beer Creek. Now, breweries, as I said, you know, we're very wary of fire. And unfortunately, the Iowa Brewing Company met a very unfortunate demise in 1916. The owner kind of saw Prohibition coming, and he always kept 2 guys in the brewery to guard against fire. He gave those 2 guys the night off, and it caught fire. A little bit of insurance money there, perhaps. But the brewery itself was basically taken out in 1916. If you were to get a permit and a backhoe and started digging in the city lot between George's and Bluebird Cafe, you would find about a couple million bricks because they basically just pushed in the sides after the fire. But at that point, the bar itself was unharmed in the original fire. So, to guard against fires in the north side, at 401 East Market Street, we were actually hose house number 2 for the Iowa City Fire Department, made to guard against the chance of fire, because again, with so many jobs being tied into the brewery, if the brewery caught fire, that was going to be very bad for the city. So they established a firehouse basically right across the street. The original section of our building was built in 1848. The main part of the store was established in 1884, and I could never figure out why our floors had some slant to it. But then when I thought about, okay, so if you've got horse-drawn firehouse, you want to have the water getting out of the building. So that's why, you know, you weren't drunk. The floors were actually kind of a little tipsy. So, but this is. This served as the firehouse until they actually built the old City Hall on the corner of Washington and Lynn Street, just right down the block. So basically when they moved, the fire department moved into the City Hall, our building became a saloon. This is a picture from 1899, the George Buffoon Saloon. such a wonderful name. But you'll notice that right across the street from the brewery that made Erlanger, the beer that made Milwaukee jealous, it only said Pabst Blue Ribbon, because back then you had tied houses where the brewery was actually tied, or the bar was actually tied to the brewery, so you could only have one type of beer. And in this case, if you went into the George Buffoon Saloon, you only got a Pabst. So the reason why it was the beer that made Milwaukee jealous was because the SOB right across the street only served Pabst Blue Ribbon and not their beer. So this is a picture from the interior of the store, also 1899. You'll notice the porcelain spittoons on the floor. If it had been a gentleman's place, it would have been brass. And you'll notice that there's no place to sit down. It was actual Iowa law back then. If you served any alcohol, you could have nowhere to sit. They figured if you're too drunk that you couldn't stand it up anymore, it was time to cut you off. And that's how belly up to the bar came in. You put your belly on the bar and you could have one more. This is before they added on the back half of the store in 1901. You have the source of heat was this old potbelly stove here. Other interesting things, the cigars right here in the case could have actually been made on the second floor, and this contraption was a brand new thing to Iowa City in 1899. Electricity actually came to Iowa City in 1898. I live at 911 Market Street, the old Bauer Broom Factory house that was built in 1896, and they had to chop up the interior of the second floor to be able to run the original knob and tube wiring because there's no electricity originally in the house. So having an electric fan would have been a new fashion gadget in the bar here. The bartender owner for a little while installed his own barber's chair to supplement his income, but he was rumored to have a little bit of a drinking problem, and as the course of the day went on, you wanted to make sure you got that clean close shave early before he tipped you a mini back and had a straight razor around your neck. So, but this is all 1899. At our location on the second floor, it was originally the Bohemian Culture Society and Dance Hall. Then it was made into a perfume factory. My brother went through all the city directories and found all these things. And the perfume factory, they made something called toilet cream. And I'm not sure exactly what that is, but just use your imagination back in the 1880s and you'll kind of get why you needed some toilet cream, I guess. Then it was made into a cigar factory and then finally into apartments. This is a picture that I got from a customer. This is actually his grandfather. This is Valentine's Grocery in 1929. So this is the interior of our store. I'm not sure who the guy is there, but he does not look very happy. But this, again, at this point, it would have been a dry goods store. The bar operated up until Prohibition, and the grocery store moved from what is now our wine room and the deli kitchen into the main part of the store. Now, all of these things, Dostal Brewing Company burning down, all had to do with Prohibition. And led by the temperance movement, and Robert Lucas, who was our first territorial state governor, actually went to Robert Lucas Elementary, kindergarten through second grade, and this picture always scared the heck out of me, looking down on us. But he was very much in the temperance movement. The Germans, the Czechs, and the Irish were very pro-drinking, and the English were very anti-drinking. That kind of led to the beer riots of 1884. I know that many of you have heard about these, but basically to put it quickly, there was a very large movement to start Prohibition in Iowa in the 1880s. It was left up to each county whether or not they should ratify it or not. All of the river communities along the Mississippi did not vote for it. Iowa City, by the slimmest margins, did vote for it. And in 1884, the prohibition was to go into effect on July 4th. It was a prohibition against selling, not against manufacturing. The beer mafia, as they were called, Englerts and the Hudson Geiger Graff Brewing Company owners basically got together. They sold a tremendous amount of beer the last day, to the tune of, I think it was like something like $20-some thousand, which if you can imagine back in the day, that would have been millions of dollars worth. Two brothers saw that the brewery owners were selling past their allotted time, and so they were going to testify. There was a lawyer for the temperance movement that was not a party to a kind of a plea bargain that went on to make sure that the brewery owners didn't get into that much trouble. Conrad Graff, the owner of the Graff Brewing Company, who had just bought the brewery, was obviously in a tight situation because he had just invested all this money, and all of a sudden he can't brew anymore. So he had a very vested stake in getting the law overturned. Long story short, they moved a trial of Englert and Graff to just east of Iowa City in Scott Township. And a mob formed by Englert and Graff decided to go to the trial. They decided to do it instead of being in Iowa City in Scott Township because they figured that they were going to get a little bit more sympathetic justice there. And the mob actually tarred and feathered the attorney, and the two brothers had to flee for their lives. In a little bit of politicking, Graff and Englert actually got away with just a slap on the wrist because Englert at the time was a member of the city council. And it was right after that that the Supreme Court ruled that the way that they did the law was unjust, so they completely null and void it. But eventually it came back in 1916, 2 years before the national prohibition. This is a picture of the German beer mafia and extended family. You have the Englerts, you have the Hotzes, you got Louis Englert, George Englert, and I thought Conrad Graff was in this one somewhere, but yeah, I think I might have. He's in here somewhere, but yeah. So they were very close, and they were the German beer mafia, and this is a kind of a representation of the tar and feathering. At one point, it got so bad that the governor was close to calling out the militia, and they eventually calmer heads prevailed. Nobody got killed, but I don't think the tar and feathering would have gone over very well back then. So the temperance movement continues to get stronger, and this was really aided by the fact that we were at war with Imperial Germany. All of the brewers, for the most part, were either of German or Czech descent, and having this very strong anti-German sentiment was not good for all the brewery owners. So eventually, the 18th Amendment came in 1919, but like I said, in Iowa, we passed it a couple years earlier in 1916. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about our family and how it relates to beer in Iowa City, because our family also is very, very intertwined. These are my great-great-great-great-grandparents. They immigrated from Bohemia to Iowa City in 1861. This is the third generation. My great-grandparents, Charles and Martha, they were born or married in 1910. And then this is our extended family with my Grandpa John here. His brother Don and his brother Bernie were very integral in the beer business in Iowa City. You may have seen this place. This was Bernie's Head Tavern. This is the oldest drinking establishment in Iowa City. This is Bernie, established 1875 as a grocery, and then it's been a saloon, a billiards hall, barber and billiards, bottling works, machine shop, and then finally Head Tavern started back in 1934. This is the second generation, Dave Alberhasky. This would be my dad's cousin. Hasn't changed very much over the years, but he's a fixture in the north side, and I kind of joke that you know, if you went in and really gave the place a good scrubbing, it might actually fall down because it's, you know, a little bit of age on that one. So Don Central Tap, 203 North Lynn Street. This is where Goosetown Cafe is currently. This was the second largest bar in Iowa City. And this is my grandpa's brother, Don, tending bar. Interesting thing, in that picture of Mayor Matt going down the ladder, behind him there is an archway. That archway was bricked up, and they kind of used shotcrete at one point, but that was actually a tunnel that goes underneath of Market Street into the basement of this building. If you're going down Market Street and you kind of feel a bump, that's actually you're going over that tunnel. And they would have gotten the beer from the brewery into the bar via that tunnel. These are, this is a picture of my grandpa and Don. This is right after my grandfather got out of the war in 1946. My grandpa was served in the Navy, 42 to 45. He was originally supposed to be a diesel mechanic aboard a submarine, but luckily his troop ship got into Pearl Harbor too late and his boat sailed without him, and it was never heard from again. So he was actually stationed at the Royal Hawaiian Hotel, which was the main submarine base for the majority of the war, and he did all sorts of odd jobs, earning money and then sending war bonds back to my grandmother. This is my grandma, and this is my dad. My dad was 2 years old when Grandpa saw him for the first time, but basically shoveling money back home to support the family and stuff. My grandparents were able to save up enough so that they were able to buy John's Grocery in 1948, and it's been in our family ever since. Interesting things about this, the sign here that we're open from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. and on Sundays we're open from 9 until 1 and then 4 until 8. And I always asked, you know, why was there that hole in that? And that was so we could have family dinner. So, you know, a lot of grocery stores back in the day did that. But in our family, as soon as you could see over the counter, you were instantly hired. That's my uncle, two of my uncles with my grandpa there. It was really all in the family. Basically, all 7 of the kids grew up in the business and worked there at one stage or another. I love that picture of my grandpa. You know, it shows a little bit how times have changed, though. You know, this actually used to be our baby section. There aren't a lot of babies in the north side anymore, so we don't sell Pampers and we don't sell formula and other things. But you know, I basically started working in the store when I was 6 years old. So I remember that we used to have a Slurpee machine over here, and that was just wonderful. But this is a picture of my dad's generation, 1967. All 7 of the kids grew up in the business. My Aunt Lori actually started the Cottage Bakery and Deli after she stopped running the deli. My Uncle Jerry retired a couple years ago. My Aunt Bev also retired a couple years ago. This is my dad, and then his younger brother, Ron, kind of took off in a little bit different direction. After he got out of the Navy after the Vietnam War, he bought a little place. Graff Beverage Works survived Prohibition by making the soda and all that, and that eventually turned into Graff Beverage, which my uncle bought in 1979. And at that point, these were beers that really got us on the map. Old Style was, back in the day, our best-selling beer. The reason why my back is so screwed up is I threw a couple thousand too many kegs of Old Style. I know, and Kathy up front used to be one of our cashiers, and she remembers how many kegs we used to sell on a given weekend. But Rhinelander from Monroe, Wisconsin, when I started working, we sold cases of Rhinelander for $4.99 a case, and we'd go through about 50 to 80 cases a week of their Rhinelander regular and Bach. But then my uncle also had some other interesting beers, Watney's Red Barrel from England and Samuel Smith, and we were these were first some of the imports that really kind of got things going. These are a couple old photos of early beer delivery vehicles. This is the Creta distributing, and this is actually right behind El Bandido's back in the day. When Cliff Creta started distributing beer, he did it via a two-wheeler. He didn't even have a truck. And he would basically just walk the cases of beer from the north side to downtown. They eventually moved, got bigger, moved into where Riverside Theater is right now. And then when my uncle Ron bought them out, they were located across from the old city carton. So there's been, you know, a lot of history of beer distributing in the north side. But, you know, we did everything from the land of sky blue waters to Foley Croissant to Old Milwaukee. When my uncle bought the Creta distributing company out, he got this nice bear costume, and I think I probably took a couple years off my sister's life when I woke her up with the bear head on early one Sunday morning. So. But we really started, and when I started managing the beer room in the 90s, we started really seeing the first microbrewery revolution. It was led by August Shell Brewing Company, was one of our first micros from New Ulm, Minnesota. A University of Iowa graduate, John Hall, started the Goose Island Brewing Company, and we were some of the first people outside of Chicago to start selling Goose Island. Alpha King, made by Three Floyds. They had a very smart marketing person. They knew how many kids from Chicago went to the University of Iowa, and so Shell was making the package for Alpha King, and we were the cheapest place in the United States to buy Alpha King. And it was $5.99 a six-pack, $19.99 a case. And all of the kids that went to the University of Iowa got hooked on Alpha King and then went back to Chicago where they bought it on draft and made lots of money. Millstream, established 1985, our first truly microbrewery in the corridor. Our friends Jeff and Sal Allen started Stone City Brewing up in Solon, and then I remember that we actually used to have to go to the Quad Cities to pick up Pete's Wicked Ale. So these were beers that really kind of got us on the map. We started the first Iowa City Brew Fest in 1996. The Children's Miracle Network was our first recipient. They kind of got it going with Gary Fitzpatrick, and they had everything all ready to go except for they didn't have any beer. And so they called me kind of a couple weeks before and said, hey, can you help us out? And so we kind of got that going, and it's been a thing ever since. That really small glass there is our first Brewfest glass from 1996. We originally had this out at the Highlander Inn, and then it kind of grew from there. Celebrate our 50th anniversary in 1998. We introduced our John's Generations Belgian White. We actually won a gold or a silver medal at the Great American Beer Festival with that. And we were one of the first pioneers that actually did a contract brew for an individual retailer in the United States. And you know, being the small guy, you got to kind of always be thinking out of the box, and this was one of our better ideas back in the day. But that's my grandfather and dad hand signing our first bottles in 1998, and Jeff and Sal did an amazing job up and so on. They really were way ahead of their time, and unfortunately had to go out of business, I want to say now about like 16 years ago, but you know, to see where Solon is at now with their beer culture, Stone City would have, if they could have held out, would have been doing wonderful things. These are all of the awards that our John's Belgian White has won, and it's really it's been one of my best-selling beers over the years, and I'm really proud of the fact that you can find this at so many different places. But at some point we're going to have to change it, because hopefully my son is going to eventually take over, and we'll get that fourth generation in there. And that's our John's Belgian White. 1999, my brother and wife and I did Doug and Mike's Drunken European Adventure. Again, it's a dirty job being the beer guy, but somebody's got to do it. We went 6 different countries in 16 days, tried 128 different beers, cataloged them all. Absolutely amazing going through England, went up to Fuller's, Turner and Smith, took the Channel over to Belgium, toured all over the Belgian countryside. Took a couple wrong turns, ended up in France by mistake, but that was cool. We popped in at the Dostal Brewing Company. Talk about a microbrewery. You have the owner and brewer, his wife, and then his mother-in-law conducts tours on the weekends, and that's the entire brewery staff. And we're just driving down the road, and we say, "Oh my gosh, it's Dostal's," and we pull in, and he drops everything he's doing and gives us a 3-hour tour. I mean, that's the kind of people that we met along the way. And we ended up in the Czech Republic. Yuri, our guide, we met Yuri through a customer of ours from Muscatine. We gave Yuri our family genealogy from 1861, and he researched our family back to 1700. We actually saw the ancestral home. We attended Mass in the church where my great-great-great-great-grandparents were married. And we pull into this small town, and it's kind of like they're having soul and beef days. And Yuri gets up on the roof of his little Skoda car, almost buckles the whole thing, but he screams out, "Your cousins from America are here to celebrate with you!" And the beer was pouring. I'll just say it that way. It was an amazing time. But that's how we really kind of got the import side of things going at John's. Because of that trip and what we did over in the Czech Republic, we started Brewnost with the National Czech and Slovak Museum and Library in 2003. Our first presentation was in 1999, and we brought back some beer and stuff, and had just a little presentation for about 120 people. And we had an auction, and one gentleman bought a bottle of the original Budweiser Budvar. And I think he paid like $80 for one bottle. And I kind of went to Gail, the president of the museum. I said, I really don't have the heart to tell that guy that came wrapped in my dirty underwear back from the Czech Republic. But it was a great thing to get going, and Brewnost has turned into an amazing thing. This was a picture from Brewnost in 2018. The unique thing about Brewnost, has anybody ever gone to Brewnost here? Besides the Iowa City Brew Fest, this is the best event that we do. Every year since 2003, we've had the different beers, but we've had it paired with the correct food. In 2018 and 2019, we had 23 different beer styles represented. Each one of those styles has a European beer, the original, and then a Iowa microbrewery counterpart. So there's a Belgian quad and a Iowa quad, and a Belgian or a German Hefeweizen and an Iowa Hefeweizen. And then each one of those beers then is paired with a different food that the chefs actually match the food to the beer. They cook with the beer, and on an annual basis, they'll pull in almost $160,000 from this one event. It's their biggest event of the year, and it's just an absolutely magical night. That's always in September, usually a couple weeks before the Iowa City Brew Fest. One year, I think we did them back to back, and it just about killed me, so I never want to do that, but it's a magical night. 2004, All About Beer magazine rated us one of the best beer retailers in the world. Press Citizen did an article, and when the Press Citizen actually interviewed the managing editor of All About Beer magazine, they asked, so where would John's be in the top 79? And the managing editor said, well, they would have been in the top 4, so I'll take fourth in the world for a little bit there. I'm also really proud that they actually, you can't see very well in the picture, but they actually used 2 pictures of our original beer room. 2004, oops, there we go. We also did a really cool event. It was hosted by the Wallonian and Flanders Trade Federation of Belgium. It was the only time that they did a Belgian beer experience, and every single Belgian beer exporter to the United States was at this show. And it was so funny because all these folks from Chicago were going, "No, wait a minute, you're from Iowa? What are you doing here?" Well, this is kind of what we did, because at that point we had, about 300 different beer glasses and all sorts of other Belgian paraphernalia. And we also had because my brother is our IT guy, he actually made it so we could sell tickets online, and that was before selling tickets online was a thing. So they used us for all of their ticket sales, and it really kind of got us on the map. And because of this show, though, I was made a liar of myself, because I always said if we buy it, it would fit. And we got in so many new beers that they didn't all fit. So the very next year, we had to build the new beer cooler. And at this point, we took this is a picture of the original wine room, and the original floor joists were the same beams that I showed you earlier, and there was so much bow to them that we actually had to sister on all new beams just so we could have a level ceiling in that. But at that point, we flip-flopped the beer room and the wine room, built the new beer cooler, and probably one of the best things that I was ever told by one of our customers. He said, watching you rearrange the store and never closing was like watching the mechanic on a 747 change out an engine in flight, because we couldn't close down, we had to keep going. And so that was a couple of years ago was our biggest construction project we've ever done. And I'm also really proud of the fact that we actually found almost the exact same brick, so as you're going down Market Street, you can't tell that there's a difference between the 1902 section and the 2005 section. This is a picture of our family in 2008. We kind of replicated the 1899 photo. My son really didn't like being the dog in this one, but he eventually got an upgrade. But that's my grandparents, John and Irma, my dad, my uncle, and myself. Again, it's a tough thing being the beer guy. We actually went back in 2008, my brother and I, and did another trip, but it was this time just in the Czech Republic. Visited, as I said, the Pilsner Urquell Brewing Company. This was probably one of the best beers I've ever had in my life. This was at Pilsner in their cellars. They actually make historic reproduction beer that is completely brewed the way that it was brewed originally, so that they have the historic record. It's nothing like the Pilsner Urquell that we drink here in the United States, but this is their cellar master pouring us a beer. This is Vaclav and myself. He was the one that had to get home, or else his wife was going to yell at him. Also, close to Pilsner Urquell and the town of Hodovar, we went to a beer spa. I'm not really a spa type sort of a guy, but the brochure sold it. You have hot water, mineral water, and beer, and basically you're taking a bath in beer. Amazing experience, but just don't drink the water, because it just, yeah, not so good. But we did this tour in hopes of actually doing an ongoing tour with the Czech and Slovak Museum and Library. Unfortunately, 2008, you might have remembered that there was a little bit of water going through eastern Iowa, so they kind of had to put that on the back burner, and eventually we're going to get that going again. So, yes, sir.
Could you drink beer out of the tap?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Straight out?
Yeah. I mean, they actually pour you a beer, and you'd be drinking it while you're taking your bath and all that. The other thing that was kind of misleading, though, was in the brochure they had two very attractive young gals in the spa. And when my brother and I got there, there was a very old, crusty ex-military guy that spoke no English and had no sense of humor. So it wasn't quite the experience we were going for, but it's still really cool. Now. Right after that, we were actually wholesaling a lot of beer to bars and restaurants, particularly at this point in the Des Moines area. I remember going up and having a meeting with Matt Swift and his partner Corey up in a construction zone that was known as Red's Ale House. And I had with me a bottle of St. Bernardus Abbot 12, Triple Carmelite, Aventinus, a couple of the really 5-star world classic beers. And we tried them in their kitchen. And Matt goes, wow, I know nothing about these, but these are really good. And I said, well, you know, you should put this stuff on. And he goes, yeah, but we got to have Bud Light and Miller Light. And I go, oh, you don't need that crap on tap. Just give them to him in bottles. So he kind of took the no crap on tap line, and that has kind of, I think, turned out pretty well for Matt and Faye. Because after Reds, they led to all these other great restaurants here in our community. And they really got the beer scene going in eastern Iowa. And so many other people have kind of followed that. Oops, I don't know what happened to my slides. 2010, we had an amazing thing happen. We finally got the state of Iowa out of the beer business. Up to that point, it was kind of a hangover of Prohibition, but any beer over 6.25% alcohol was considered liquor rather than beer to the state of Iowa. After Prohibition, beer was fine for distributors to sell, but wine and liquor actually had to be purchased at a state of Iowa liquor store. And in 1986, the state finally got away from the state liquor stores, but the state still controlled the distribution of alcohol, and they still do today. So all of the booze that we sell at John's, we actually have to buy through the state of Iowa. And you can imagine customer service, not always the best. Up to that point, all of the beers that we were buying that were over 6.25% alcohol, we had to purchase through the state. And they were very not interested in doing a lot of sales, so I would actually have to go directly to the importer and say, hey, I want to buy your beer. And we eventually got to the point where we had over 200 different Belgian beers. We had a couple hundred German beers. And it really was a wonderful thing, but all of the Iowa breweries couldn't actually sell these high-proof beers. They were limited to brewing just the lagers, and pretty much that was it. If they wanted to brew a imperial stout, they could, but then they'd actually have to sell it to the state of Iowa, and then the state, depending on what kind of liquor license they had, could either sell it to me or sell it to somebody else, but they couldn't actually sell it at the brewery. So they didn't want to have anything to do with that. 2010, we finally got them out of the high-proof beer business, and the number of beers that we have now mushroomed to over 4,500. Yes, sir.
Yeah, you got, the state of Iowa still capped, I think, at like 15%.
Correct, yeah.
Is there anything that's going to take that cap off so you can bring in wheat from Avery or Texas, maybe there's one from Scotland or Brewdog stuff?
I would, they just passed something so we can actually sell and we just got them in last week. They're actually cans of straight like gin and tonic. And so they have actually taken that cap off. The problem with those beers that you're asking about is we just don't have a population enough to be able to ever get those beers in here, because they're going to go to Chicago. They're not going to come to Iowa, unfortunately. I'd love to be able to sell those, because, I mean, I know that I could, but, you know, you look at, like, Goose Island Bourbon County Stout. That was, it still sells out almost instantly. When we first got Bourbon County Stout in, we're the only place in Iowa that sold it, and I sold 3 pallets 1 year. The second year, we only got in a pallet. The third year, we got in 10 cases, because the popularity of that beer kind of exploded all over the country. we were the kind of, the guinea pig that got it going first. But so many of those amazing beers, they just don't make enough of them to really see a lot of widespread distribution. And because our population in the state's so small, we'll probably never get them, unfortunately. So I wish I had a different answer. I really do. This was a fun one. This was my old assistant, Joe, and myself. This is probably the best beer I've ever had in my life. This is Vestlatern 12. This is a Trappist monastery beer made by monks in the monastery. At this point, there were 7 of these Trappist breweries making beer. These guys didn't like exporting outside of Belgium because they would sell their beer to a distributor or an importer, or I'm sorry, in their case, an exporter for like, $30 a case, and that exporter would then sell it for $100 a case, so they didn't feel that they were making quite enough money on it. So the only way that you could get this beer was actually going to the brewery on a Saturday. The monk would sell you a case of beer, and then he'd ask you, you're not going to resell this, right? Because if you lie to a monk, you're going someplace you probably don't want to go. But they needed a new roof. So they decided to ship, I think it was like 20 pallets of this beer to the United States, and we were lucky enough to get a pallet of it. Now, my friend who is our distributor, I asked him, so how much is this going to sell for? My question should have been, how much is this going to cost? Because I didn't realize that on this day I was taking a vow of poverty because I made $1 on every 6-pack of that beer. That 6-pack of beer cost $89. And we sold out in a matter of minutes. And every December, we always have an open house. At this open house, excuse me, it was actually the national rollout day was the next day, but I decided since I already had my open house scheduled that I was going to just do it a day early. NPR did a nationwide article, radio article on it, and they actually mentioned us. And at that point, we only had 4 incoming phone lines, and I was getting between 5 to 8 phone calls a minute from all over the country inquiring about this beer. And eventually, we had to tell our staff, just answer the phone, John's Grocery, we have no Vestlatern. John's Grocery, we have no Vestlatern. John's Grocery, we have no Vestlatern. But this, like I said, was probably one of the best beers I've ever had. And so if you ever come across this, definitely grab it, because it is well worth it. Now, in 2011, we brought beer back home to the north side. The Iowa State Brew Fest had been going for a number of years, but we had kind of outgrown our location. Originally, it was, like I said, out at the Highlander. Then we had it behind Fitzpatrick's. When we outgrew that space, we moved out to Coralville, to the old Chicago. We're out there for a number of years, then moved back to behind what's now Orchard Green because they had expanded the lot a little bit. But then when they built the new building behind Orchard Green, we didn't have a space for it. And at that point, I had been working with Tim Fisher, who used to own the Pit and now is my HR guy. But we decided to bring it back to the north side. And we came up with this really nice logo. And just for your little bit of history, we have St. Mary's, we have Brewery Square, Hudson Geiger Union Brewing Company. You have the Goosetown Market, you have Polly Eyes, and you have John. So this is kind of like a little collage of the north side. But this has been something that has been amazing for our neighborhood over the years. I love this. We took a drone photo a couple years ago. This is the Englert's original brewery house. This was the house that they built when, and they moved the Boston guest house kind of across the street. I don't know why some of my slides aren't showing up, or pictures aren't showing up, but we also incorporated Soda Fest into it, really trying to make the Northside Oktoberfest as family friendly as possible. I've always taken a lot of pride of being a scoutmaster and stuff of my scouts, and this is a picture of my son who kind of ran the root beer stand for a number of years. But we make it family friendly, and we get tremendously large crowds anymore. It really is fun for all ages. We have Kurt Bocci, our wandering musician in Lederhosen. We had the Polka Dots band from the Senior Center. It's one of my Optimist members, Bill Gogger, blowing the tube in that one. And that's probably one of the cutest pictures of my daughter, and that was root beer, by the way. That was not beer in her glass. But you know, in honor of Irving Weber, everybody loves Lederhosen. Funny story, we actually asked the city of Iowa City, can we dress up Irving Weber? And the guy from the city said, sure. He didn't believe that we're going to do it. So, one of my old managers made the Lederhosen for him. That was a lot of fun, seeing Irving in that. But we always have the blessing of the beer. We're always in good hands. That's the way we always start off every single brew fest since we've been in the north side. We also had a hand in starting Burfest. This was in 2012. This is at the Coralville Convention Center. And this has been a pretty amazing change. In 2012, when we started, we only had 39 brews, and we only had 19 Iowa breweries. In 2018, we had 62 booths and 58 Iowa breweries. Right now, in the state of Iowa, we actually have more breweries than we did before Prohibition. And it kind of shows the level of beer knowledge and what the consumers want, and that's our good microbreweries. And you know, with what we've got going on and the quality of our beer, this truly is the good old days of beer in Iowa. 2016, we did a little bit of remodeling at the store. We went from being fully open for business to this state in less than a day. We kept our front counter, kept our back coolers, but everything else came out. We sistered on all new beams, and we went from this to being back open in a total of 12 days. And I only fell through the floor once, which was really kind of good. But it helps having lots of friends that can do construction, as we're working pretty much 24 hours a day getting all that done. 2016, we did another beer with our friends down in Knoxville at the Peachtree Brewing Company, our Sour Wit, and we're actually looking to do another beer coming up here very soon with our friends at the Reunion Brewing Company in Coralville. We celebrated our 70th year on the north side last year, and it's pretty amazing. When my grandparents opened up, there were 28 other family-owned corner groceries in Iowa City, and you know, pretty much every couple blocks there was a grocery store, and being the fact that we're the last one, you know, is a big sense of pride, and it's because we had a large family, because we had a good location, and because we have amazing customers, and you know, we're here for you. I was talking to a police officer, and he goes, you know, why do you keep doing it? And I said, well, because, you know, if I close down John's, it'd be like, you know, I'm losing a part of myself, but also, you know, Iowa City would be losing something pretty amazing as well. And when you look at, you know, Hamburg Inn and Polly Eyes and a lot of the other iconic businesses, you know, they're what make Iowa City unique. So we're very happy to continue on to the tradition. This is the next generation. My son got the better gig, and we actually got my dog into it, but that's my daughter. This is DJ, our general manager. He's been with me on and off for almost 20 years now. You know, I'm very anxious to have the fourth generation eventually take over. But you know, when I think of Iowa City and the future of beer, I think it's pretty bright. You know, when you look at the amazing things that Big Grove's doing and how they're just continually expanding, you know, it shows a lot for what we've got going on. This is Kingsley Botchway, used to be on the city council. He and I got invited to have the first ever beer down at Big Grove, and I was very, very honored to have that. But, you know, there's been a lot of history in our fair community, and there's a lot more to be made. So upon that, I'll kind of open it up for any questions.
Does anybody have any questions? Wait,
Yes, sir.
no, you can't talk till I give you this.
What's the future of the beer caves down there?
So at this point, they're going to remain kind of untouched. There's been talk about trying to do some sort of a development on the corner where Pop's Barbecue is, and if that were to happen, and the ownership of Brewery Square would be amiable to it, you know, there's been talk about trying to do something as far as a restaurant or something in the beer caves. But at this point, unless you're putting up a multi-million-dollar huge building that would be able to incorporate bathrooms and another staircase and an elevator, it's probably not going to happen. So.
Any plans to cellar any beer down there locally?
Can you
No.
repeat your
Well, yeah, the question is to sell our beer down there. We actually, and unfortunately it didn't come across in the slides, but we actually have our own cave in John's, and we used to sell our beer in that. But just getting down into the beer cellar is such a convoluted thing, and also we don't have access to it all the time. We had talked about, you know, trying to come up with ways that we could make something in the beer caves be profitable, like, you know, doing like wine storage or something down there. But it's just the plain and simple fact of getting stuff in and out of there is so complicated and so scary. So, yeah.
How come they had to put the beer caves so deep?
Basically, the lager beers need to be fermented cold, and it's 55 degrees year-round down there. So even in the heat of summer, it would take very little ice to keep it cold down there. At one point, Marlon, our city archaeologist, showed me kind of a rendering of there's 3 caves that are natural caves and man-made caves put together in the north side that, as I recall, there's a comma-shaped one that goes from underneath the John's to kind of underneath the Friday's Barber Shop. And then there's a crescent-shaped one that goes underneath of the city lot to kind of underneath of Hamburg Inn. And then there's another one that goes underneath the Brewery Square, down Market Street, down Clinton Street, and ends up underneath of the Englert. And those would have been to hold all of the ice that they would harvest from the river. Obviously, harvesting ice is a very critical thing for the brewing of beer. So they needed to have, you know, these humongous blocks of ice kept way underground so that they would melt very slowly and be able to be handled for the rest of the year. Because in order to brew beer, you need it cold.
I think we have to wrap up now because usually have an hour, but this was so good that you went on and
Sorry.
kept talking. So thank you very, very much, Doug.
You're welcome.
We
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Thank you.